Welcome to my apiary. This video is about shop safety, and this was instigated by a viewer of one of my recent videos, and he presented an alternative way of doing something that I was showing on my video that I was well aware of. It's nothing new to me, but he did point out that, you know, it's probably a better way to do what I was doing. And he's right. A better way, a safer way in general to do it. I'll maintain that what I was doing in context was thoroughly safe enough for me. And what I mean is there's a couple different kinds of safety. And there's safety advice like don't grab a spinning blade in your shop. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but it is a rule, you know. And sometimes you need to tell people that kind of thing, which is fine. Sometimes you need to tell them. But I'm not here to tell you, because my motto is, and I stand by it, your personal safety is your responsibility, not mine. I'm not showing you how you should do things. I'm just sharing my journey. Okay, so the other kind of shop safety would be something like me telling you, if you don't have a pilot's license, don't go and try and fly an airplane. That would be bad. That would be a bad idea for you to do that. Most people might kind of understand that if I don't have a pilot's license, I probably shouldn't go and try to fly an airplane. But there are people out there who don't understand that. And that's an absurd example to illustrate my point. And the point I'm trying to illustrate is the safety rules that you need to follow are commensurate with your experience level with the task at hand and your understanding of what can go wrong and how and why, what to do if it does, and all of those sorts of things. So if you're a total novice and you don't have that experience of what can go wrong or what to do when they do, then you need to follow far more stringent rules of safety in your shop to keep you out of trouble. I do take some shortcuts or some risks that a novice shouldn't take, and usually I'll point those out. And I kind of did point those out at times in that video. But I've been thinking about his comments, and I thought, I'm going to make a little video about that, because there are a couple of ways that I could have demonstrated a safer way to do what I was doing. So I'll show you here the maneuver that I was performing that was pointed out to me that it could be improved. And again, I am not conceding that it was wrong or it was unsafe. It was correct and safe enough for myself as an experienced woodworker. However, if you're a novice, you may want to do it differently, and I'll demonstrate how you might want to do it differently. So this is what I was doing right here. And how I could do that differently to make things safer is really twofold. I could do two different things to make that safer, and I'll demonstrate on the table saw here. So the first thing I could have done to make what I was doing safer is rather than leaving my miter gauge bare, these miter gauges have screw slots for a reason, because often people will attach a fence to them. I've just grabbed a piece of plywood. This is not necessarily the best fence because it might not be very straight, but you'll get the idea from my example here. And why that's important and why that could be important is, and again, I've grabbed some scrap here. This is not what I was working on, but this will be sufficient to illustrate. What I was doing before was I was holding a long piece on my fence like this, and it was, you know, there's a distance between the fence and the blade here. Okay. So what I can do with an auxiliary fence here is I can fill that gap. I can actually bring that all the way down here as far as I want to. You know, if I'm cutting that wide, I can bring my fence all the way down there. And one nice little advantage of that is you notice that when I would cut, I'd get a little bit of tear out at the end. Well, if you have a fence that extends right across your blade, then the blade is appearing behind the fence here. The cut in your material is backed up so it doesn't tear out when you cut. Okay, so that's the first thing that I could have done. And the second thing I could have done, so as I was cutting the other day, I was not making an off cut. It was a non-through cut. So that means that the piece to the right of the blade, or more accurately, the piece between the blade and the fence, was never free. So there was far less chance of that binding. However, if you're making an offcut, let's say we'll use these two kind of as an example. If you were to do this, this is what's forbidden. Okay, when you slide this through, and when you cut that, I'm going to back it up to illustrate. When you cut that like this, okay, and now you've got an offcut that's free, and it can twist and bind between the saw blade, and when it gets to this point, it'll catch a tooth here and bind, and it can actually throw it at you or any one of a number of very, very bad things. So again, when I was cutting those reducers, it was not a through cut, so therefore I was not producing an offcut. However, in both situations, you can do better. If you're making an offcut, what I'm going to describe is mandatory. If you're doing a non-through cut, what I'm going to describe is a very good idea, but not mandatory. So what you can do, and there's a couple of downsides to this, and I'll explain, but what you can do is you can put up a sort of, I'm going to line this up nice so I can illustrate. So you can put up a block here on your fence, get a clamp that block to the fence, and the requirement here is that block is well short of the fence. Okay, and so what that means is when you start your piece here, you can hold it, and that requires you to hold it tight to your fence now. And when you run that piece, you can register it against your stop block to get your length correct, and then run it up here. Now that offcut is free, and when you cut it, it's not going to bind in there. It's free in here. I mean, it can still hit the saw blade and do nasty things, but it's never going to bind because your area here is larger than your offcut by a good margin. Larger than your offcut at that kind of an angle, really, is what you're looking for. Okay? So coupled to those two things with your workpiece and an auxiliary fence, and that fence can run anywhere in here. Okay, so if you were to put this together, run that through, like screw that fence to your miter gauge, and I actually have some adhesive sandpaper that I'll put along here so that when I'm holding my workpiece to there freehand, it grips it and it doesn't tend to move around. So I think you get that idea. You put that stop block on your fence and then put that fence on your miter gauge. And I wouldn't have the fence this tall. It's just some scrap I grabbed. Your fence only needs to be 1.5 inches tall or so. And then you can run that through like that, cut that off. And now because the fence is running right through the saw as well, it backs up your cut and it won't tear out like it was for me the other day with those reducers. So that makes a nice product. That's even safer than what I was doing. And again, because I wasn't making a through cut, that's an acceptable way to do it. This is even better. Now for the downside. It's not a huge downside, but and it wasn't a downside for what I was doing, because what I was doing was not a critical length kind of a cut. It didn't really matter where that happened in the workpiece. But the downside is my stop block now has made my distance gauge on my table saw inaccurate. I know this is a 2x4, so it's 1.5 inches, or it should be farther. So that's really the downside to that. And the downside is I didn't have that set up, and I was kind of lazy to not set it up. And see, I get in the mode of I'm just going to throw a few things together for the bee club, and then I start taking shortcuts, which is a bad thing. I shouldn't do that. And thank you very much for pointing that out and giving me the opportunity and the idea to actually do a follow-up video and show you some of the ways that you can actually work safer in your shop. I hope that's helpful, and I hope it helps you be a safer woodworker. Woodworking is very enjoyable, but it's a pretty dangerous sport, to be honest. There's a lot of people who sustain some pretty serious injuries in the woodworking shop. So we all have to be careful, follow certain absolute rules, and then follow all of the secondary rules that if you have, if you're a novice or you have a little less experience, then you definitely need to add to those non-negotiable rules, some rules that just kind of keep you out of trouble. I'm assuming you're a beekeeper, so there's probably analogies in the beekeeping world. It's not a life and limb situation. However, when we're new beekeepers, we're generally dressed head to toe in our bee suit, gloves and all, veil, suit, gloves, ankles are duct taped and all that kind of stuff the very first time we go and work our bees. And it's not quite a perfect analogy because it's more of a fear thing, but we want to make sure we don't get stung, sort of thing. After we get a few years behind us and we're starting to become more accustomed to or aware of the actual dangers, then we can kind of choose the times when we can actually work out there in t-shirt and shorts for some of us, and a veil without too much, extra danger to us. But we know how to read the hives. We know how to read them. We know how to read the weather and say, well, today's going to be a good day for the bees. Today they're going to be cranky, so I better dress up. That sort of thing. And again, it's not a perfect analogy, but it's an analogy that I think you can relate to because you're probably a beekeeper if you're watching my channel. So that's just the little blurb that I wanted to put out for today, because it was brought to my attention, and I thank you for that. I'm always receptive to suggestions and even respectful correction. I will say that I can spot those who want to argue for the sake of arguing a mile away, and if that's you, then you'd be talking to yourself, because I have no time for that sort of thing. Conversation, even debate, is good. Arguers, I have no time for arguers. So that's it for today. So have a great day and have fun.